We've been exploring the theme of self-directed learning, specifically in the new world of AI that we find ourselves in. Today, we're going to take a little bit of a deep dive into the world of certifications and see how those are a tool that we can leverage to help us define what path we should take for learning. And also, they can be really valuable because they give us specific feedback on our ability to translate and replay that data in a way that shows we've understood the material. Um, Today we're going to focus specifically on the Azure AI 102 exam. So this is the second and more intermediate level certification for AI in Azure. And we'll use that to explore how you can use some of the skills from self-directed learning. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about how I specifically prepared for the exam and what I think will help you be successful if you're looking to pass this certification. So, welcome to the Talk to Me PDD podcast. I'm your host, PDD. This is my podcast where I talk about all things knowledge work, leadership, people management, AI, technology, whatever comes to mind for me. So, today is episode 32, preparing for the Azure AI 102 exam. So, if you're not familiar with this exam, it is billed as sort of an intermediate level exam that builds on the Azure AI-900, which is sort of the foundational exam. You probably want to take that first if you have not and you're thinking about the Azure AI 102. I'm not always a fan of standardized testing, certification, things like that. But I will say both of these I thought were really good in the sense that the material that you need to study is relevant. I felt like I did learn things that were helpful in the topic as opposed to just studying to pass the test. With any standardized test, there's a little bit of sort of gamesmanship and understanding how to take the test that comes along with it, but I didn't think that was sort of the dominating factor in the preparation here. So I think both of these are worthwhile if you haven't done them, and I would encourage you to check them out. Now, the two tests are a little bit different, and I think you have to prepare for them differently. There's some overlap, but there are some things that if you've taken the AI 900, if you take the same approach, I'm not sure how successful you will be with doing that on the AI 102. So for the 900, there's a lot of really good practice test resources that you can take, a pretty wide bank of questions that'll help you go over the material. And also the scope of the material that you have to cover is a little bit narrower on the AI 900. When you get to the 102, there's a pretty broad scope and it's pretty in depth in terms of what you need to understand. So I think when you get to the AI 102, it's going to be a little bit different approach. So preparing for the 900, I think you can be very successful. You can probably just pass it by doing well on the practice test if you go through enough time. I think they're a good resource for any certification if you have access to them. My approach is I just try and iterate through them till I get to a point that I can consistently get to 100% correct on the practice test. And usually spreading this out over a period of days, if not weeks, um, so that I'm seeing that I can retain that knowledge and go through it consistently. And it's not just in kind of this very short term memory that I'm going to lose when I go and take the actual test. There is some of it, especially if you don't have that many questions, that you're just going to memorize the specific questions. I think that's okay, as long as you can sort of take away and remember the topics from it, and you're not just purely recognizing the pattern of the question and picking the answer. Um, One of the things that if you don't do, you can really multiply um, the effect of this practice test is understand why the answer that's correct is correct. And many of these are multiple choice type questions and usually have three other answers that are wrong. So understanding those topics and why they're not the right answer is a really valuable tool and takeaway that you can get from these practice tests as well. And if you're doing that for four instead of one, you're getting four times the amount of knowledge out of a single question. And looking at other topics and key phrases that might show up on the actual test. I think that's really helpful. I try and do that anytime I take a certification test. Um, if you get a score that's not where you want it to be on the practice test or even on the actual one, oftentimes they'll break it down into specific sections or topic areas. And if you have a particular area that's weaker than another, that can help you focus and go and study there, and help bring that score up. If they're all not where they need to be, you can still just pick one at a time and then see if you're demonstrating progress, at least in that specific area, as you iterate through and try and practice more. Um, for both of these tests, there are some great public resources as well. You can go and look at the different learning paths and go through the different material. It's all set out there for you. If you want it, you don't necessarily have to go and find other resources, although there are, that can be helpful. So that was AI 900. I'll talk a little bit about how I prepared for the AI 102 and how I would recommend it. I will caveat and say that the 102 test assumes that you have some programming experience. I think you can pass it without that. And I'm going to go over a little bit some of the topics that I think you should understand from programming afterwards. And I'll try and do it in a way that is hopefully understandable if you don't have sort of the technical skills here. If you try and go and do it on your own, it may be difficult to kind of find the specific areas that are relevant. So hopefully that'll be helpful from this as well. Um, so one of the things that's a challenge I found about the 102 is that there aren't as many practice test questions. So pretty quickly, I was able to iterate through all the available ones and kind of exhaust well the benefits of that. There's a very large and significant amount of content that you can prepare for this. I don't remember exactly how many sections are. I think something like 7 or so. And each of those is then something like, 7 plus 30-minute to an hour training modules. So a lot of information. What I tried to do is get at least a third of the way through each of those sections and making sure I understood that material, doing some sort of active recall, which I mentioned a little bit previously, which you could use an AI tool for. You could just use flashcards. You could use whatever is appropriate, but just to make sure that you're drilling those topics and those questions, even if you don't have the practice test questions on those areas. There are a lot of labs that you can do in those sections. I didn't personally do any of those because I think it's going to take a lot of time, and I was trying to do the preparation in maybe, I don't know, a week, 2 weeks period. I'm sure they're worth doing, but if your goal is more kind of learning the high level material and being able to pass and demonstrate the test, I don't think you necessarily have to do the labs. Like I said, I got maybe a third to halfway through most of the sections. There might have been some that I did all the way through if I felt that was an area I needed some more help in. Ideally, I think you would go through all of them and you'll probably learn a lot, but then at the same time, it's a lot of material and just the volume. Sometimes it can be harder to memorize things. But if I think if you do that, most people can be successful here. Um, One of the things that I'll say about both of these tests is I found the actual test complexity to be a lot harder than the practice test. Just the the structure of the test, the way the questions are asked, the formatting in the actual test, I found more challenging than the practice test, both for the 900 and the 102. But for the 102, I found the test structure especially challenging. So I would say just prepare yourself for that on top of kind of all of this material. You're going to have a test and questions that in their formatting are a bit tricky as well. So something to be aware of and kind of mentally prepare yourself for as you're going through it, that there may be things there that are going to try and trip you up just in the formatting. And with any of these tests, good to go through and read the questions carefully to make sure that you're not missing some of the details, especially so in some of these, more trickily worded questions. And then oftentimes you can find clues within the questions themselves so you can make more of an educated guess. Sometimes I've even had the experience where I had a question a few back that asked something similar, and I can go and use some information from that and apply it to the question that I was currently on. Not a lot, but it did happen a couple of times. So that's my general spiel on prepping for AI-900 and AI-102, the specific ways that I prepared for both. So now I'm going to go into and give you a little bit of a deep dive on the programming concepts that I think you need to know to pass the 102. And this is designed for people that are not programmers, do not have a programming background. So I'm going to try and simplify some things. Hopefully it makes sense. Hopefully it's helpful. So the three high-level concepts that you want to understand are what are APIs, what is JSON, and what are packages in software. I think if you can understand those three things at a high level, and I'll go through what I think you should know, then I think you can be successful on this test without being an actual hands-on developer. So APIs, application programmer interface. So application, just a piece of software that's being built. Programmer, these are designed for people who are writing code, not for the end users of the service. And then interface is defining sort of the structure of the interaction, not necessarily what's going to happen in terms of the implementation behind the scenes. So maybe that's more confusing, less confusing, I don't know. So what an API is defining is what's called a function. You may also see the term method, which is slightly different technically, but for the purposes of this, if you don't know the difference, just assume if you see one, it means the same thing. And a function is going to take some sort of input and give you some sort of output. So your APIs are defining the functions that are available for you to provide some input and get some output from these various Azure and Azure AI services. A helpful way to think about this is if you've ever done just basic algebra, and let's say you have an equation where you have x plus y, and you can think of that as a function that takes in two inputs, a value for x and a value for y, and it outputs a single output, which is a number, which is the sum of those two. So that would be a function you might call add x and y, with x and y being the inputs. Now, just because a function is called add doesn't necessarily mean it has to do anything. Under the hood, it could write you a poem if you wanted it to. But in practice, and especially for certification exams, the names of the functions that you see are very likely going to give you some insights about what they do. So this is a good tool for the test as well. So if you're having to decide on a particular type of function that might be called through an API and you know what it's supposed to do, look for things in the name or look out for certain naming conventions. And that can be helpful, and another tool that can help you make educated guesses here. One of the examples that I came across that seemed to be common or a lot of questions around it is calling a function to generate an image through a generative AI prompt. So one of the variables there would be the prompt that describes what you want the image to do. You might have other inputs on the size or the definition of the image, things like that. So sometimes there are minimal number of variables, like you have to specify certain things. In this case, you have to specify a prompt of what you want to generate. And then there may be ones that are optional, like the size or the quality or things of that nature. If I were to think about it in a non-technical term, you could think about it like if I want to make a function to make an ice cream sundae. So you might have inputs like your ice cream flavor, and maybe you have some particular choices, whether you want sprinkles, whether that's chocolate or rainbow, hot fudge, things like that. So sometimes it's useful just to have some examples of what you might define as a function, what type of inputs that you would allow, and what ones you would have to have, and what ones could be optional, and then what you're expecting to have returned. So that's the first one, APIs and functions, sometimes referred to as methods. We won't get into the details between the two. All right, now the second one that I mentioned is JSON. So JSON, heard it pronounced JSON like that, or JSON more like the name. Um, so this comes from JavaScript, which is a programming language. Object, meaning that it's going to define some structure, and notation, just the way that we're keeping track of it here. So you don't need to know the acronym, but I just thought I would share that. And as we're sending information back and forth between a program that we're writing and using these Azure services, we're going to need to communicate, and we might have a fair amount of data, and we want to have some structure and work with it in a standard way. So JSON is a format that's commonly used across these different things. So it's just enforcing the structure, which it is basically what they call a combination of name value pairs. So in the early example where you're adding X and Y, if you are passing that in as a function call using JSON, you might have your name being X and your value pair being 2, for example, if you wanted X's value to be 2. So now why is this all important? You're going to need to know how to read JSON objects to pass this test or to answer some of the questions. And being able to look at that and understand, okay, there's a hierarchy of information here, and certain types of services are going to return information in a certain way. And some of the questions will ask you, okay, like what part of that JSON object, what name do you need to look at to get this particular value for a particular service? So if you don't understand what a JSON object is and the hierarchy of it, it's going to be hard to answer those questions. So make sure you look at that before and understand that it's really not too bad kind of once you get into the habit of looking at it, but if you're not familiar with it, it's going to be tough. Something to know as well with the way that JSON data works and in some of these questions and services is there can be a lot of information and it's not always all returned together. So that's a common theme here. So you can think about if I had a service that would give me information about a book. If I give it the title of the book, if it gave me back the entire thing, it would be a massive amount of information. So let's say it gives me back all the chapter headings. Great, now I want to go and read a chapter. That might mean I need to make a second call and give it some additional information from the first to get the details of that chapter. So usually what that'll mean is in the first one, you might have the title of the chapter, and usually you'll have some sort of unique identifier, which is a number that is only going to match to that particular chapter. And then you can take that unique identifier and make a second function call through the API. Say, hey, give me all of the content based on that. So that's a theme that you'll see on this test as well, and a concept that's important to know. All right, the last one is packages. And this is just another way that you can maintain hierarchy in programming. So let's say that I have a function called add and somebody else has one, and then there's a standard way to do it. If we all call our function add, the computer doesn't know which one to use. So in the same way you would have sort of hierarchy in an outline, packages allow you to do that as well. So there will be some standard packages that get used in the various types of services that you'll be asked about on the AI-102. And getting familiar with those is important. Oftentimes, the test will ask you to sort of fill in different parts of the package. So it could be at various levels. It might not necessarily be at the bottom level. So understanding what packages are, how they're just a way of organizing at a different hierarchy and separating different names so you can specify what exactly you want to have called. So that's something that you'll see. You don't necessarily have to understand all of it, but when you're going through the material, keep in mind what you see. Again, much like function names, there's often conventions about how these are named. And if you get used to those conventions, it's going to make it easier for you to guess and answer on the test. So there you go. Those are my takeaways from preparing for those tests. I wish you the best of luck. If you have any questions or want me to deep dive into any of the specific areas on either of these two tests, happy to do that. Drop me a note. And then next time we'll get back sort of more to general learning for preparation and that kind of world of AI skilling and staying up to speed on what's happening. So until next time, thanks for joining, and good luck on your certifications and good luck on your learning.